Welcome to this week's edition of Newsmakers at postcrescent.com. I'm Larry Gallup, Post-Crescent Opinion Editor, and I'm joined by reporter Nick Penzenstadler. Our guest this afternoon is Representative Reid Ribble, a Republican from Sherwood who's finishing his first term as the 8th Congressional District Representative. He's running for re-election in November against Democrat Jamie Wall. If you have questions for Representative Ribble, you can type them into the chat box that's to the right of the video player. And with that, I'll turn things over to Nick.
Thanks, Larry, and thank you, Reid, for joining us. We appreciate your time here.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Nick.
So we were just talking. We have 40 days until November 6th. So tell us what you've been doing leading up to today and what your next 40 days looks like.
Well, the next 40 days looks a little bit different than the previous 2 years. There is still a blend of both official responsibilities. I do have a job as a member of Congress. I'm going to continue to do that right to Election Day, and hopefully in the 113th Congress. But you begin to blend in with that. Some campaign-related events. Last night, the Brown County GOP had a Meet the Candidates event where former Governor Tommy Thompson was there, and Wisconsin State Senate candidate John Maka was there. And so you start to blend in some of those types of events in your calendar, but it's busy.
So is it tougher to get your official business done when you have to balance all that?
Well, sure. I mean, you're doing 2 jobs, and so you try to make sure that you're carving out adequate time to make sure that all the official work that you have to do gets done first, and then you fill in the calendar with the rest of the things. And I do a lot of more campaign-related events on weekends, Friday nights, Saturdays, and Sundays. Try to reserve Sunday mornings to go to church with my wife, and that's kind of one of those periods of time during the week that I don't give up much. And
things slow down just a little bit.
Yeah, you want to have time to kind of refresh yourself a little bit.
So looking back at your 2 years now, what have you learned, and what was frustrating? It seemed like you definitely expressed some frustration, especially last week when we hit the recess.
Yeah, well, I think there's frustration, particularly for me for the recess. I wanted to stay in D.C. and continue to get work. You know, there's talk about the financial cliff, all the tax policies that expire at the end of the year. And so there's clearly some frustration. And coming out of the business world like I did, where speed and efficiency is almost everything in the business world. Government doesn't work that way, nor should it, but you do have to adapt to that pace. You know, our founders set up a system of government that required consensus. You know, they said if you can find consensus, do those things. If you can't find consensus, don't do those things. And so I've had to really work hard at building relationships with my colleagues across the aisle so I could create some friendships, thus build some trust so that we could get things done like the highway bill.
Yeah, I mean, that was a big victory before everything shut down for the year. What is left on the table that you think still has hope and can get done this year?
You know, I've never been through a lame duck Congress session before, so there are things that have to be done. Obviously, we have to address the tax code. We have to either extend everything or we have to find some type of reform, some type of common ground there. I think the American people will weigh in on November 6th. That will send a trigger to the Congress to respond. Certainly, there's some work left to be done on the Farm Bill. If that doesn't get passed in the lame duck, then there's extensions that have to be done. We have to make sure. And I've led a group of members to extend the MILC program for their dairy industry here in Wisconsin. And so there are some things there that still need to get done. And we'll see what the agenda looks like when we get back after the election.
Yeah, you mentioned the Farm Bill, and that's something people have pointed to as something that's traditionally not so controversial. It's been hung up on this food stamps and the SNAP program. So what is your stance on it, and why do you think it's been held up?
Well, right now it's not being held up so much between Democrats and Republicans. It can be held up a little bit between urban and rural. And to a certain degree, as food stamps have grown so rapidly, it is now the largest part. Nearly 80% of the total funding for the Farm Bill is in nutrition. And so there's some disagreement there, but that's not the only disagreement. There's disagreement on sugar policy, for example. There's disagreement on dairy policy. The House Farm Bill looks pretty similar to the Senate Farm Bill, so I think once it gets to conference, it could happen pretty quickly. But coming out of committee, even though it came out in bipartisan fashion, I supported it in committee. I think when it gets to the floor, you'll see a series of amendments if it goes like every other bill. And we'll just have to wait and see whether we can get to 218 votes. But if we don't get the 218 votes, then it's going to be essential that programs like MILC and others that we've worked so hard on to protect for Wisconsin dairy industry get extended for a year. We can go back to the drawing board in the next Congress.
So I believe Senator Johnson supports breaking out the food stamps. I mean, do you support that? Is it time to split these things?
I think it is. I think you could have. I think that when they put it in, the idea was, well, we can't get urban members of Congress to vote for it without food stamps. Now food stamps have become so large that they're having a difficult time getting rural votes for it. And so I think it's time, if food stamps are going to continue to be funded in that $70 to $80 billion a year range, that's such a large number that it deserves its own attention outside of ag policy, and we shouldn't hold America's farmers hostage because of a different part of the farm bill.
So your opponent in the race here, Jamie Wall from Green Bay, has pointed out, he's like, this is the do-nothing Congress. We have failed. The American people deserve better. I mean, has this Congress failed, and why or why not?
Well, if there's been a failure of the Congress, it's started at the White House. Either the president is willing to work with us or not work with us. I have a tendency to look at the Congress in its broad context between, you've got two chambers, right? You've got the House of Representatives, you've got the Senate. I think any even casual observer can take a look at the body of work that the House has done and the body of work that the Senate's done, and they'll make their own conclusions about who's doing nothing. You know, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of bipartisan passed legislation sitting over at Harry Reid's office. He can choose to vote for them or not. He's choosing not to. I'm assuming he's taking his marching orders from the President of the United States. The American people will have to weigh in on that office on November 6th.
Right, and you've made the point that one man, Harry Reid, makes that decision to bring it to the floor.
He does.
And has that been a surprise? I mean, obviously you knew how that worked, but
Sure.
Were you surprised that less has come to the Senate floor?
Yeah, I've been surprised by it. Now, I knew that things moved fairly slowly in the Senate, but they've got the majority, and I don't understand why they don't just allow these things to be voted on. But this is the same body that hasn't passed a budget for 3 years, and so I don't think they're taking their work seriously. It's a much more political body than the House. We hear a lot of the discussion about why can't the parties work together. Well, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of bipartisan passed legislation that have moved through the House with Republican and Democrat votes that are sitting on the Senate. And so our problem is not bipartisan. The problem is we can't get to bicameral agreement. We can't get the Senate to act. Without the Senate acting, the House isn't going to be able to move.
So you serve on the House Budget, the Ag and Trans Committee. These are
Yeah.
great, very big profile committees. So are those some of your proudest moments in office? You talked about speaking in front of Obama on the debt crisis. I mean, is that your proudest moment?
Yeah, I certainly think that's one of the most memorable, to be asked by the Speaker of the House to address the President on behalf of the whole conference. But I think when you look at legislative accomplishments, you have to look at the highway bill. I mean, there were 9 extensions on the highway bill. So when Democrats controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House, they were unable to get a highway bill done. And yet in this split government, Republicans in the House, Democrats in the Senate, we were able to get a highway bill done. There were 23 extensions of the FAA funding. We were able to get a 4-year FAA bill done. And so the idea that you can't work together is not completely accurate either. We've been able to find ways of working together. Listen, if I was able to, on the highway bill, with some of the streamlining things that we wanted to do to get road construction moving along, if I was able to walk down into the Senate chamber and have a conversation with Barbara Boxer, who's no bastion of conservatism, and we were able to find a compromise position that would allow us to get 218 votes in the House of Representatives, that's not a bad accomplishment.
Yeah, I imagine that's got to be nice to be able to get something and hang your hat.
Yeah,
finish
and this
it.
is a big jobs issue, you know, and so we're very happy to get that work done.
Back to your opponent a little bit here. He said when he entered the race, Jamie Wall, this isn't personal, but Reid Ribble is part of a broken system. So let's take that first part, that this race isn't personal. It has turned a little personal. Have you felt that?
I've felt it from him, not from me. I mean, I've not talked about Jamie hardly at all, and I've never met Jamie Wall, so I don't really have an opinion. All my opinions have to be based on what he says, either about what his ideas are or what he says about me. I can appreciate him saying it's not personal. He could dial back. He could choose to dial back the personal tone. But I am part of a system, but it's the system our founders set up. And a lot of people complain about that system. But that system was designed to protect the American people from an overreaching government. Remember, you have to look at the historical context back in 1776. They didn't want an over-oppressive government. They didn't want a government that was unleashed. They wanted a government that moved slowly, that only would move forward when the people's representatives could agree. And that's how it works. And so it can be frustrating if you're expecting immediate results and immediate legislation to get passed right away. But I don't think that's what the founders wanted or intended.
We have our first question from the audience.
I have two sets of questions. One, there are several people who want to know what your position is on food stamps and whether that program should be cut.
Yeah, well, on the food stamps, I think if we take a look at food stamps, in 2009, we budgeted, the Congress, before I got there, budgeted about $53 billion, I think it was $53,600 million, right around there. May not be the exact number, but it was in that $53 to $54 billion range. At the time, if you remember, unemployment was moving upwards to 10%. Today, we're budgeting 77 to 78 billion, but unemployment's come down to 8.3% or 8.1%. And so you could make the argument that as fiduciaries of the taxpayer money, that as more people come back to work, and the president, quite frankly, is running around the country bragging about all these great jobs he's created, 4.9 million in the last 4 years, you should be able to make the fiduciary responsibility that food stamps should be adjusted down. Now, let's put it all in perspective. From 2009 to today, food stamp spending has gone up 22 billion, while unemployment has gone down. The House plan would reduce the rate of growth so that you would go down by 1.6 billion rather than roughly 2.5 billion in growth. And so it's not that food stamps are being cut, it's that the rate of growth is being adjusted to recognize that more Americans are working. And so I supported the House bill coming out of committee. I'm assuming Jamie Walsh supports those same cuts because he's asking for the Farm Bill to be passed, so he must support cutting food stamps as well. And so we need to recognize that the hardworking taxpayers want their members of Congress to be cognizant of where that money is being spent.
We also have several people asking whether you're going to be debating Jamie Walsh.
Yeah, I'm assuming that throughout the course of the next 40 days, we'll be able to find an opportunity for Jamie and I to debate, and we'll find the right format to do that. I debated Congressman Kagan twice during the last campaign, and throughout the course of the time, our campaigns will be discussing and coming up with a conclusion on debates.
So how would you frame this election? I mean, there are other elections that are far right, far left. Jamie described himself as a moderate Democrat. He's got this business background. You have a business background. How are you different? How do you frame this decision?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, I think there's a significant difference in our business backgrounds. I actually ran a company that had real employees and were producing things. Jamie has spent the bulk of his consulting work outside the state of Wisconsin helping companies create jobs in Atlanta, while I've been creating jobs in Wisconsin. I think that's a pretty significant difference. I wasn't doing something academic, trying to tell a business owner do this or that. I was actually applying those skills that I had learned and creating products and selling them to consumers so we could grow our company. So I think there's quite a difference in our business backgrounds. I don't know enough about Jamie Wall's policies because he hasn't articulated positions yet too much. I guess as the media starts asking him, he'll have to answer about his positions on cap and trade because he supported a carbon tax when he was in the Doyle administration. That's pretty far left of center. But there'll be clear distinctions for sure, and those distinctions will come out as the campaign goes on.